3 words. That was all it took. 3 words delivered without drama, without raised voice, in the flat, unhurried cadence of a man who had spent 2 decades being right about things that other men found uncomfortable. He was standing in a concrete-walled briefing room at a forward operating base in Al Anbar province, Iraq. He was looking at a whiteboard covered in figures, round counts, engagement distances, kill confirmations, the kind of data that American commanders presented with pride, proof that their snipers were busy, were active, were generating outputs. The British warrant officer looked at those numbers for approximately 30 seconds. Then he turned to the Marine Lieutenant Colonel, standing beside him, and said the 3 words that would echo through 2 branches of special operations training for the next decade. Your snipers are wasting ammunition. The silence that followed lasted long enough for the air conditioning unit mounted above the door to cycle through 2 full rotations. The Marine officers in the room were not men who accepted criticism quietly. They were combat veterans, many of them decorated, every one of them proven in the kind of close-quarter street fighting that Fallujah and Ramadi had turned into the defining crucible of American military experience in the 21st century. And they were listening. Because the man who had just told them their snipers were wasting ammunition had that morning observed something none of them had seen before. He had watched a 2-man British sniper team positioned in a derelict building overlooking a known insurgent supply route lie motionless for 11 hours. 11 hours. They had not fired a single round. And by the time the morning briefing concluded, the intelligence they had gathered from that position had identified the movement pattern of a senior Al-Qaeda in Iraq logistics coordinator, a man who had survived 7 previous coalition attempts to locate him with sufficient precision to enable a capture operation the following night that succeeded without a shot being fired. No ammunition expended, no noise, no compromise, no collateral damage. One of the most wanted men in Al Anbar province in detention. 3 words. Your snipers are wasting ammunition. This is the story of what those words meant, where they came from, why the Marines listened, and what changed when they did. It is a story about 2 military systems that had arrived at the same war with fundamentally different understandings of what a sniper was for. To understand what brought a British Army warrant officer to a forward operating base in Al Anbar province with the authority to say those 3 words and be taken seriously, you have to understand the state of the war in 2005 and 2006. Al Anbar province, the vast Sunni heartland stretching westward from Baghdad to the Syrian and Jordanian borders, had become the most lethal piece of real estate on earth. The provincial capital of Ramadi sat at the center of a grinding urban battle that had swallowed whole battalions. Fallujah, 45 miles to the southeast, had been the site of the largest conventional urban battle fought by American forces since the Korean War. In November 2004, during Operation Phantom Fury, roughly 10,000 American and Iraqi troops had cleared the city block by block in fighting so intense that it reduced entire neighborhoods to rubble and killed over 100 American servicemen in 8 days of combat. The insurgency had not died in Fallujah. It had dispersed. The networks that had built the city's defenses simply relocated, absorbed the lesson of what concentrated force looked like when Americans arrived in strength, and adapted. They broke into smaller cells. They operated from civilian structures. They used the local population as camouflage. They moved their bomb-making operations to safe houses that changed every few days. And they continued killing. In the summer of 2005, the Marines of the 2nd Marine Division were recording over 1,000 attacks per month across Al Anbar province. Improvised explosive devices were the primary weapon, but sniper activity by insurgent fighters had also escalated significantly, forcing American patrols to move differently, to expose themselves less, to treat every rooftop and every alleyway as a potential firing position. In response, American military commanders leaned harder on their own sniper assets. The U.S. Marine Corps Scout Sniper Program, designated Military Occupational Specialty 0317, was and remains one of the most respected sniper programs in the Western world. It traces its institutional origins back to Vietnam, where Marines like Carlos Hathcock established a philosophy of precision marksmanship that became legend. The Scout Sniper Basic Course, held at Marine Corps Base Quantico in Virginia, ran approximately 79 days and covered an extensive curriculum. Marksmanship at known and unknown distances, wind reading, ballistic calculation, urban and rural observation, stalking exercises, camouflage and concealment, and the complex human factors of target discrimination in an environment where combatants and civilians occupied the same space. American Marine snipers were not undertrained. They were among the best prepared precision marksmen in any military on Earth, and in Fallujah and Ramadi, they had demonstrated it. Marine Scout snipers working in support of 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines had been credited with disrupting insurgent movement and command coordination during the Second Battle of Fallujah in ways that contributed directly to the operation's ultimate success. Individual Marine snipers had recorded engagements at ranges exceeding 800 meters in dense urban terrain under fire, a technical achievement requiring extraordinary composure and skill. The problem was not individual ability, the problem was doctrine. The way American snipers were being employed in Al Anbar in 2005 and 2006 reflected a particular understanding of what a sniper team did. They provided overwatch for Marine patrol elements, they engaged confirmed insurgent combatants, and they generated confirmed kills that were reported up the chain of command as evidence of operational effect. This was not wrong. It was tactically sound, battle-tested, and within the paradigm that had governed American military thinking since the intensive urban combat of the early Iraq deployment. But it was incomplete, and the incompleteness of it was costing lives in ways that American commanders operating inside their own doctrinal framework could not clearly see. Because in Al Anbar in 2005, the insurgency's greatest vulnerability was not its fighters. Its fighters were replaceable. Recruits crossed from Syria in a steady stream. Trained insurgents died and were replaced within weeks. The insurgency's vulnerability was its command structure, the logistics coordinators who moved bomb components and foreign fighters across provincial boundaries, the financiers who channeled money from external donors through a network of trusted intermediaries, the bomb makers who possessed the technical knowledge to construct the specific variants of vehicle-borne IEDs that were killing Marines at a rate that was generating serious political pressure in Washington. These men were rare. They could not be easily replaced, and they were, by 2005, very good at not being where American forces expected them to be. They had learned to treat electronic communications as a death sentence. They had learned that staying in any single location for more than 48 hours was dangerous. They had learned to recognize the signature of American surveillance, the drone that orbited just a little too persistently over one particular block, the helicopter that flew the same route too often, the armored patrol that had swept the same street 3 times in a week. They had adapted to American methodology, and American methodology was, in one critical respect, making their adaptation easier. American sniper teams in Al Anbar were achieving precision engagements, sometimes at remarkable distances, against insurgents who presented themselves as targets. But the act of firing a precision round in an urban environment is not a silent act. A muzzle report, even suppressed, carries. The impact signature of a precision round striking a human body or a hard surface produces sound and physical evidence. The immediate aftermath of a sniper engagement in a dense residential environment, the shouting, the movement of people away from the impact point, the potential for a medical response that reveals the sniper position's general direction, is information that an experienced insurgent network can process and act upon. Every shot the American snipers fired told the enemy something. Every engagement, however successful in tactical terms, was a data point that the insurgency's surviving command elements could analyze. After a sustained period of kinetic sniper activity in a particular district, the insurgents who mattered, the planners, the financiers, the bomb makers, had moved. They had taken their operations to areas that the sniper teams were not covering, and they continued their work. The Marine commanders, looking at their engagement data, saw numbers that looked like success. Round counts climbing, confirmed kills accumulating. The system was operating. The system was what they could not easily see because their doctrinal framework did not give them the analytical tools to see it, was what was not happening. The high-value targets were not appearing in the kill chain. The network was adapting around the kinetic pressure. And the spectacular attacks, the vehicle-borne IEDs that detonated in markets and at checkpoints and beside armored patrols, continued at a rate that those confirmed kill numbers could not seem to reduce. The British Army's relationship with sniping is different in character from the American relationship, and the difference is rooted in institutional history that predates the Iraq War by decades. The British military has been producing snipers continuously since the First World War, when the catastrophic casualties inflicted by German sniper operations in the trenches of the Western Front forced the British Army to develop a counter-capability from near nothing. The men who built that capability, scouts from Canadian and Australian contingents, stalkers from Highland estates who understood the application of fieldcraft to precision shooting, former big-game hunters who could estimate range and wind at distances a trained infantryman could barely see, established a philosophy that the British Army never entirely abandoned. That philosophy can be stated in a few sentences, though understanding it fully takes years of training to internalize. A sniper is not primarily a marksman. A sniper is primarily a surveillance and intelligence asset who possesses the capacity to deliver precision fire when the tactical situation demands it. The shot is the last resort, not the first response. The field skills, the ability to move invisibly through terrain, to remain motionless in a hide for extended periods without being detected, to observe and accurately record patterns of movement and behavior, to build a comprehensive picture of enemy activity from a single concealed position. These are the primary skills. The marksmanship is the secondary capability that gives those field skills lethal application when required. This is not a distinction American sniper doctrine rejected. American sniper training incorporated stalking exercises, hide construction, and observation post procedures as foundational elements of the course. But the relative weight given to field skills versus marksmanship, and more critically, the operational culture that governed how sniper teams were actually employed in the field, differed significantly between the two systems. The British Army Sniper Course, run at the Infantry Battle School at Brecon in Wales, covered a curriculum that placed exceptional emphasis on the patience and endurance required to conduct sustained covert observation. Candidates who arrived at Brecon with infantry experience and above-average marksmanship ratings discovered that their shooting ability, while necessary, was insufficient to pass. The field skills were tested with a rigor that eliminated candidates who were excellent shooters but could not remain genuinely undetected in a position overlooked by trained instructors specifically tasked with finding them. The stalking exercises, in which candidates were required to approach to within a defined range of an observer position without being seen, fire a blank round, and withdraw, were conducted under conditions that tested not just camouflage technique, but the deeper psychological quality of absolute stillness. Candidates who could shoot a precise group at 600 meters found themselves failing because they moved slightly at the wrong moment, or because their body outline at the edge of a ghillie suit caught light that they had not accounted for, or because the vegetation they had used to construct their concealment was marginally inconsistent with the surrounding ground cover. The instructors who identified these failures were snipers themselves, trained to the same standard, looking for exactly the kind of micro-movement that an alert observer in the field would notice. If a trained British sniper instructor working at close range and with full attention could find you, an insurgent lookout on a rooftop across a Ramadi street could find you. The standard was not theoretical, it was calibrated to the operational environment. The British sniper who arrived in Al Anbar as an exchange instructor had spent 14 years in the British Army, the last 8 of them as a sniper and sniper instructor. He had completed the selection process at Brecon, had served in Northern Ireland in the final years of the conflict there, had deployed to Bosnia, and had operated in Afghanistan in the early years of the coalition campaign against the Taliban. His rank, warrant officer, placed him in a category that the British Army treats with a particular kind of institutional respect. A warrant officer in the British Army is not a commissioned officer. He does not hold the Queen's Commission, but he is the repository of the regiment's practical knowledge, the custodian of its skills and its institutional memory, the senior non-commissioned professional whose opinion on matters of craft and doctrine carries weight that crosses rank boundaries in ways that have no direct equivalent in the American system. An experienced warrant officer could, within the norms of the British military culture, tell a lieutenant colonel that he was doing something wrong, frame it in terms that were simultaneously respectful and unambiguous, and expect to be heard. The 3 words that opened this story were not insubordination. They were an assessment. The assessment began not with numbers, but with observation. The British warrant officer had been attached to the Marine Regiment as part of a coalition exchange arrangement that had been expanding throughout 2005 as American commanders sought to draw on the combat experience of Allied special operations and infantry elements who had been developing their own approaches to the Al Anbar insurgency. His arrival was not accompanied by formal ceremony or institutional fanfare. He moved into the compound at the forward operating base, introduced himself to the relevant Marine officers, asked to accompany a sniper patrol on the first available opportunity, and was granted permission. What he saw that first night established the framework for everything that followed. The Marine sniper team he accompanied was a 2-man element consisting of a well-trained, experienced scout sniper and his spotter. Both men were competent. Both men had completed the Quantico course. Both men had operational experience in Fallujah. They moved to their position in the hour before dawn, using the darkness and the empty streets to approach a building that offered a line of sight down a street identified by intelligence as a probable insurgent movement corridor. They established themselves in an upper-floor room, cleared the furniture to create an unobstructed field of fire, and waited. Within 40 minutes, they had identified a potential target, a man on a rooftop across the street at a range of approximately 340 meters, carrying what appeared to be a weapon. The engagement lasted under 3 seconds. The British warrant officer, watching from a position in the room's rear corner, observed the shot, confirmed the hit, and watched the 2 Marines immediately begin preparing to relocate. Standard procedure after a confirmed engagement, to prevent the firing position being bracketed by return fire or compromised by the movement patterns of anyone who had been monitoring the street. They were out of the building within 4 minutes of the shot. The British warrant officer said nothing during the move. He said nothing during the vehicle extraction back to the forward operating base. He said nothing during the initial debrief. But during the full briefing the following morning, when the Marine lieutenant colonel presented the engagement as evidence of effective sniper employment, 1 confirmed hostile killed, position successfully held for 3 hours before the engagement, clean extraction with no casualties, the British warrant officer asked a single question. What did you learn about the street? The Marine sniper team exchanged a glance. They had a physical description of the man on the rooftop. They had a confirmed engagement. They had the approximate location of the body. The lieutenant colonel cited these facts. The British warrant officer nodded slowly and said nothing more at that briefing. He was not being dismissive. He was processing the gap between what the Marine system was measuring, lethality, round count, confirmed kills, and what the British system would have required of that same position, that same vantage point, that same 3 hours of occupation. A British sniper team in that room for 3 hours would have recorded every movement on that street. Not just the man on the rooftop, every pedestrian, every vehicle, every pattern of movement that could be cross-referenced against known insurgent behavior profiles. The British sniper team would have noted the times at which the street was empty, the times at which particular individuals appeared, the routes they took through the intersection visible at the far end of the street, the structures they entered or exited, the vehicles that parked and departed. Over multiple occupations of the same position or adjacent positions covering the same ground, that data would have accumulated into a pattern of life analysis with the granularity to identify which particular individual on that street was behaving in ways that were operationally significant, not because he was visibly carrying a weapon at that moment, but because his movement pattern, cross-referenced against signals intelligence and human intelligence from the regiment's agent network, suggested a function within the network that made him a higher priority target than any man simply seen with a weapon on a rooftop. The man on the rooftop was a sentry. Sentries were numerous and replaceable. Sentries were placed precisely because they were expected to be targets, to draw fire, to reveal enemy positions, to provide a tactical warning function. Engaging the sentry was, in the most precise sense of the phrase, what the network wanted the coalition to do. It revealed the firing position, expended ammunition and operational time, and left the operationally significant figures, the people the sentry was protecting, unmolested, their movement patterns unobserved, their activities continuing. The 3 words came the following afternoon. The briefing room at the forward operating base became, in the hours after those 3 words landed, something unexpected, a classroom. The British warrant officer had not come to the meeting prepared to lecture. He had come prepared to be an observer. But the Marine Lieutenant Colonel, and this speaks to something important about the institutional culture of the Marine Corps, its genuine willingness to absorb hard lessons when they are delivered by someone whose credibility is established beyond reasonable doubt, did not react with defensiveness. He asked a question. Then what should they be doing? What followed was an afternoon of instruction that those present would later describe in terms that reflected genuine intellectual disruption. The experience of having a foundational assumption challenged in a way that, once the alternative was articulated clearly, could not be unheard. The British warrant officer began with the philosophy. A sniper's primary product, he explained, is not a dead combatant. A dead combatant is a tactical output. A sniper's primary product is intelligence, the kind of granular ground-level intelligence that no satellite, no drone, no signals intercept platform can generate, because that kind of intelligence requires human eyes at ground level, at close range, for extended periods. Reading the behavior of other human beings in their natural environment with the interpretive capability that only a trained observer can bring to bear. A drone circling at altitude sees movement. It can track a vehicle from one location to another. It cannot tell you whether the man who emerged from that vehicle and spent 20 minutes in that building is nervous, whether he looks over his shoulder before he enters, whether his route through the market is direct or evasive, whether his pace changes between one intersection and the next. These behavioral indicators, the body language of guilt, of concealment, of fear, of tradecraft, are readable only by a trained human observer at ranges measured in tens of meters, not thousands. A sniper team in an observation post, watching a specific location over multiple periods of occupation, builds a behavioral database of the people who move through or inhabit that space. The first occupation establishes a baseline. The second occupation reveals anomalies against that baseline. The third occupation confirms those anomalies and begins to establish patterns. By the fourth or fifth occupation, a trained observer can tell the difference between a market vendor who opens his stall at 7 in the morning every day and a man who appears at irregular intervals, stays for 20 minutes, and departs in a direction inconsistent with the nearest residential area. One of those men is a civilian, the other warrants further investigation. The discipline required to execute this kind of intelligence collection from a sniper position is distinct from, and in many respects, harder than the discipline required to make a precise shot at 600 meters. The shot, however technically demanding, is active. It requires focus, breath control, trigger discipline, calculation, qualities that the human nervous system, under sufficient training, can sustain in short, intense bursts. The observation mission requires something different: the ability to remain genuinely alert, genuinely attentive, for hours, sometimes 12, sometimes 18, sometimes longer, in conditions of physical discomfort, in a hide that prevents movement, recording everything that happens in a defined area of ground with the same level of detail at the 11th hour that was brought to bear in the first. This quality is not a technical skill. It is a character trait, and it is one that the British sniper selection process specifically tests for. At Brecon, candidates were placed in observation exercises in which they were required to watch a specific area of ground and record everything they observed over extended periods. The recordings were then compared against a complete record of what had actually happened in that area during the observation window. Candidates who had correctly recorded the majority of events: the man who appeared briefly at the edge of a tree line, the vehicle that passed at a specific time from a specific direction, the subtle change in the position of a marker that indicated a dead drop had been serviced. Passed. Candidates who had missed events or recorded events inaccurately failed regardless of their marksmanship scores. The message was institutional and consistent. The information you gather matters as much as your ability to act on it. The British warrant officer then turned to the specific application of these principles to Al-Anbar, and here the afternoon shifted from philosophy to practical doctrine. He described, using the maps on the briefing room wall, the way a British sniper team would approach the problem of a district like the one surrounding the forward operating base. A district where the insurgent network was active, where its command elements were mobile, and where previous operations had consistently failed to locate the key personnel responsible for planning and executing attacks. The process began not with deployment, but with study. British snipers, before establishing observation posts in a new operational area, spent significant time on what the British system called detailed ground study, an intensive analysis of every piece of available intelligence about the target area, conducted at the sniper team level rather than delegated entirely to staff intelligence officers. Satellite imagery was examined not for individual targets, but for patterns, the streets that generated vehicle traffic at particular times of day or night, the buildings whose rooftop access might conceal observation positions, the areas of dead ground, terrain features that blocked line of sight from the most obvious coalition observation points that an experienced insurgent would use as a movement corridor. Maps were annotated not with target coordinates, but with questions. What happens at this corner between 0300 and 0500? Who uses this alleyway, and from which direction? What is the function of this building whose windows face northwest toward the coalition checkpoint rather than toward the street? These questions were then taken into the field by the sniper teams, and the field answers were fed back into the analytical picture, which refined the questions for the next deployment. The observation posts themselves were selected and occupied with an approach to concealment that reflected the British system's absolute prioritization of non-detection. A British sniper team entering an observation post in an urban environment would typically do so in the hour before dawn, moving through routes that had been selected specifically for their low ambient observation, streets with no known insurgent lookouts, approaches that used alleys and interior courtyards rather than main roads where movement at that hour would be conspicuous. Entry to the observation post building was made through a route that avoided disturbing the exterior. No broken locks, no tire marks, no footprints at the threshold. Once inside, the team moved to their position using techniques that produced no audible signal to anyone in adjacent buildings. No squeaking floorboards, no displaced furniture, no disturbance of dust patterns that a careful observer would notice. The position itself was chosen for a sight line rather than for comfort, and comfort was not a consideration that British sniper doctrine accommodated. An experienced British sniper team could occupy a hide in an urban building, a gap in crumbled masonry, a space behind a collapsed interior wall, a position in a room where the only available line of sight to the target area required the observer to lie face down with his optic at floor level for the full duration of their tasked observation period. That period was not measured in hours the way American sniper team rotations were typically structured. It was measured in operational requirements. The team stayed in position until the question they had been sent to answer was answered, or until they were extracted for reasons of security. There were no rotation schedules, there was no 4-hour window, and then extraction to the forward operating base for a meal and rest. There was the position and the mission, and there was patience that had been selected for and trained into these men over years of professional development. The impact on the Marines in that briefing room was not immediate conversion. Military institutions do not change their doctrinal frameworks in an afternoon, but what the afternoon produced was something more valuable than a policy change. It produced a shared vocabulary, a way of articulating the gap between what American snipers were being asked to do and what British doctrine suggested they could do. That gave Marine officers the conceptual tools to begin asking different questions about their own employment of sniper assets. The lieutenant colonel who had presented the engagement statistics that morning was a man who had spent his career developing a deep practical understanding of infantry combat. He was not resistant to new information. He was resistant to new information that was presented without credibility. The British warrant officer's credibility was, by that afternoon, established. It had been established by the operational results from the British sniper team he had brought with him, the 11-hour observation that had produced the intelligence enabling the no-shot capture operation. That result was visible, measurable, and could not be explained within the existing doctrinal framework. The American system would have credited a sniper team with a confirmed kill and called that a success. The British system had produced a high-value capture with no indication to the insurgent network of how their man had been located, and with the observation position still intact and available for future use because no shot had revealed it. The lieutenant colonel began asking specific questions. How long could a British team maintain a position without resupply? The answer, with appropriate pre-mission preparation, carrying sufficient water and cold rations, and with 2 men sharing observation duties in rotation, up to 72 hours in an urban position, produced a silence that reflected the scope of what was being described. American sniper teams were routinely pulled at the 4 to 6 hour mark in urban environments because the tempo of American operations, the logistical rhythm of the forward operating base, and the tactical preference for active engagement over passive observation all pushed toward shorter, more frequent deployments. The British answer suggested a fundamentally different relationship between the sniper team and the operational cycle it supported. He asked about the training that produced the observation skills the warrant officer was describing. The answer, that BRACON dedicated significant course time to observation exercises specifically scored on information content rather than marksmanship, and that British snipers trained for extended hide occupation as a distinct and accessible skill, identified a specific gap in the American course structure that could be addressed. The American Scout Sniper Basic Course covered stalking and concealment in depth. But the extended observation mission, the sustained, patient, intelligence collection-focused occupation of a hide that the British warrant officer was describing as the primary employment model, was less emphasized as a standalone discipline with its own assessment criteria. These were conversations that, over the weeks that followed the initial briefing, began generating changes in the way the Marine Regiment employed its sniper assets. Sniper teams that had been deployed on 4-hour overwatch rotations began receiving tasking that specified intelligence collection objectives alongside engagement authorities. Post-mission debriefs that had previously focused on round count and confirmed kills began, including structured reporting of observed movement patterns and behavioral anomalies. Sniper team leaders who had been trained primarily as precision shooters began receiving supplementary guidance, often directly from the British warrant officer, on observation report formats, pattern of life analysis techniques, and the specific indicators that distinguished insurgent operative behavior from civilian movement in an urban environment. The results over the weeks and months that followed were not dramatic in the way that confirmed kill numbers were dramatic. There was no single metric that captured the shift the way a body count captured lethality. What changed was more diffuse, but operationally more significant. The compound of a mid-level al-Qaeda in Iraq logistics coordinator in Ramadi was raided 41 days after the initial briefing, in an operation that targeted him specifically because a Marine sniper team conducting extended observation of a market area that the British warrant officer had identified as behaviorally anomalous had recorded his movement pattern over a period of 6 days with sufficient precision to establish his routine, identify his primary safe house, and provide the raid force with a narrow window during which he was consistently present and alone. The capture produced 4 mobile phones, a laptop computer, a cache of financial documents, and a list of contact names that fueled 11 subsequent operations. None of those results would have been possible if the sniper team occupying the observation position had fired on the first individual they identified as a potential combatant, revealed their position, and been extracted. The British warrant officer had been in Iraq for less than 8 weeks when this operation succeeded. He attended the debrief. He did not claim credit. He asked what the observation team had found most difficult about the extended occupation of the position, made notes on their answers, and the following day delivered a 2-hour practical session on the specific techniques: how to manage the physical discomfort of prolonged motionlessness, how to structure the observation record so that patterns became visible across multiple sessions, how to identify the moment when continued occupation presented a greater risk than the intelligence being collected was worth. That addressed the difficulties they had described. He was not transforming the Marine Corps in those sessions. He was doing something smaller and more durable. He was transmitting a professional philosophy, one conversation and one briefing and one night patrol at a time, to officers and sniper teams who were capable of receiving it and intelligent enough to recognize its value. The doctrine that eventually emerged from this period did not bear his name. Doctrine rarely credits its originators with precision. But in the training materials that Marine sniper instructors took back to Quantico from their Al-Anbar deployments, in the after-action reports that shaped the revision of Scout Sniper Employment Guidelines, in the conversations between Marine officers who had served in Al-Anbar and the next generation of Scout Sniper students who came through the course in 2007 and 2008. The influence of what had happened in that briefing room was visible. Extended observation missions were given more explicit doctrinal standing. Intelligence collection objectives were formalized as primary tasking for sniper teams in counterinsurgency environments. The assessment framework for sniper team effectiveness was expanded to include information products alongside engagement data. These were not revolutionary changes. They were refinements. But in the mathematics of counterinsurgency, where the difference between finding the right target and finding a target is the difference between degrading a network and generating a replacement, refinements of this kind have effects that compound across months and years of operations. The British warrant officer's 3 words were not an insult. They were a diagnosis. And the precision of that diagnosis, its identification of a specific gap between what American snipers were doing and what they were capable of doing within their own technical competence is why it landed with the force that it did. The Marine lieutenant colonel in that briefing room was not a man who lacked the capacity for self-critique. He was a man who had been operating inside a doctrinal framework that was excellent at what it measured and less good at seeing what it did not measure. The British system forged over 80 years of continuous refinement across conflicts in Europe, North Africa, Malaya, Borneo, Oman, the Falklands, Northern Ireland, Bosnia, and Afghanistan had arrived at a different calibration. It had arrived at a philosophy that prioritized the intelligence value of the sniper's position over the kinetic value of the sniper's shot. Not because kinetic effect was unimportant, but because the intelligence value of the position, once exploited through extended patient observation, consistently produced higher-order effects than any individual engagement could achieve. In a counterinsurgency where the enemy's center of gravity was not its fighters but its command and control architecture, the bomb makers, the financiers, the logistics coordinators, the network managers who maintained the operational coherence of dispersed insurgent cells. The intelligence-first approach to sniper employment was not merely philosophically superior, it was operationally decisive. You cannot replace a bomb maker in 48 hours. You can replace a sentry in 48 minutes. The British understood this distinction at the doctrinal level, built their sniper employment model around it, and transmitted that understanding to American counterparts who had the tactical skill to implement it and the institutional courage to accept the lesson from which it came. Craig Harrison, a British Army sniper with the Blues and Royals Cavalry Regiment, would in 2009 fire the confirmed longest-range sniper kill in history, 2,475 meters, using the Accuracy International L115A3 chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum. The shot was a marvel of technical precision, of wind reading, ballistic calculation, and physical steadiness under conditions: mountain altitude, unstable bipod position, target at the edge of the round's effective envelope, that would have made most trained marksmen hesitate to attempt it. It is the kind of shot that defines public perception of what a British sniper does. But Harrison himself, in accounts of his service, described the waiting as the harder part. Not the shooting, the watching, the hours in the hide, the discipline required to observe without moving, to record without revealing, to resist the impulse to act before the full intelligence picture justified action. That discipline, patient, precise, and profoundly unglamorous, is the foundation on which the shot rests. Without it, the shot is just a shot. With it, the shot is the final delivery of an intelligence operation that began days or weeks before the trigger was pressed, that gathered information no drone could gather, that built a target picture no satellite could construct, and that placed the round exactly where it needed to be because every preceding step had been executed with the same standard of care that the shot itself demanded. Your snipers are wasting ammunition. The three words were never more than a starting point. What followed them, the conversation, the instruction, the operational application, the gradual incorporation of a different philosophy into a different military's professional culture, is the story that matters. Not because it resolves cleanly into a lesson that can be stated in a sentence, but because it does not. It resolves into a sustained professional dialogue between two military systems, each with genuine strengths and genuine limitations, each capable of learning from the other when the conditions for that learning are created by the right person in the right room at the right moment, saying the right three words. The British warrant officer served the remainder of his exchange posting and returned to the United Kingdom. He went back to training. He went back to Brecon, to the mountain courses and the stalking exercises and the observation assessments that had been his professional world for 14 years. He trained the next generation of British snipers in the same philosophy that he had transmitted in one concentrated afternoon to a Marine regiment in Al-Anbar province. He did not give press interviews. He did not write memoirs. Warrant officers rarely do. The knowledge he carried was not the kind that generates headlines. It was the kind that accumulates over decades of patient professional practice and transmits itself, one conversation and one training session and one field exercise at a time, through the organisms of military institutions that are capable of absorbing it. What he left behind in Al Anbar was not a revolution, it was a recalibration. And in the war against an enemy who had adapted specifically to exploit the kinetic reflexes of the most powerful military on Earth, a recalibration of that precision was worth considerably more than the ammunition it saved.